All right, we're joined by the voice of the Bills, old friend Chris Brown. We used to do radio together back in the day, and he has gone on to do wonderful things. Brownie, I cannot believe it's been this long for you to get a spot in the basement.
Yeah. What did I do wrong?
I think you got a little busy. I think that's what
Yeah.
happened. So it was actually a lot of right. You did a lot of right. And that's why you weren't in the basement until now, today, which we're happy about. Great to see you. Congratulations, obviously. And are you used to getting called the voice of the Bills yet? Has that sunk in?
Yeah, I don't think I've used that term yet for myself. Um, it still doesn't feel, I don't know, it feels a little awkward. I prefer radio play-by-play broadcaster. I don't know if there's something about the voice of the Bills that just sounds a little pretentious if you say it yourself when you're that person. So
Yeah.
I'll leave that to everybody else.
Okay. Well, for the other people that say it, is it and you've always been a super humble guy, and I could see how it could get to some people's heads, but not to yours. I think you're that kind of guy that sort of takes things in stride as they come, and you've done just that in this transition into your new gig, man.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I I can blame my parents for that one. Um, my mom beat me over the head with not talking about yourself, never brag, and all of that stuff. So it always, as I got older and you get to college and you hear people self-glossing and things, that just never appealed to me. So mom's at fault for that one.
Hey, so were you? I mean, you were a soccer player growing up. Were you always a football guy? I mean, did you always like football? Did you always follow football, even though you played soccer?
Yeah, I really casually followed football. It's pretty funny because growing up, I was Yankees, Knicks, Islanders, and then when those seasons were over or had not started yet, I would just kind of flip a football game on, and every week for me it was Jets and Giants. Um, I mean, I remember some players that I liked. I liked Freeman McNeil. I remember him and Wesley Walker, but I wouldn't call myself a dyed-in-the-wool Jets fan. I was a Yankees fan. I am a Yankees fan. I'm still a Knicks fan. I root for the Islanders, although I have different affiliations now. Um, but yeah, I mean, football was like a distant fourth for me. And when I was in college and decided radio was what I wanted to do and play-by-play broadcasting was something I aspired to do, I was hoping to do like, I think I was in my mind's eye, I was thinking I'd be doing like major college basketball or if lucky enough, maybe even NBA basketball. So to end up in the NFL arena was probably not where, if you asked the 23-year-old me where I thought I would be, it would not be here.
All right. So were you a big Marv Albert guy?
Yes, like Marv.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I had a pretty good impersonation of
That's
him.
awesome.
So yeah, me and my high school buddies used to mess around all the time. And I don't know, maybe we weren't the usual. I mean, we were way into music and listening to those kinds of radio stations, but we would spend a good deal of time, driving around the car, listening to Mike and the Mad Dog and WFAN in New York all the time. So, and part of the reason we did was because they had the Knicks on, and we'd listen to Knicks games on the radio and driving around. Like if we're going from point A to point B, or we're picking up one of our buddies, we'd have the game on, and that's just kind of how we rolled, I guess, for lack of a better description.
Yeah. So you probably didn't have a football play-by-play guy that you could rely on as inspiration back then.
No, not really. I mean, like I said, when I had a Jets or a Giants game on, I would listen to that. I was a big Walter Payton fan. I would say that would probably be my favorite football player growing up. But we didn't get a whole lot of Bears games in New York until probably the 85 Bears, and then they were on nationwide very often. And so then I get a chance to see Sweetness run a little bit more. But yeah, when I consumed football, it was strictly on television. It was never over the radio airwaves. So yeah, I didn't really have anybody to kind of model anything after, really.
Yeah, I mean, you had ultimately Van. I mean, when you got to Buffalo and you were doing radio and all the other things you were doing at an early age out of school, that was the guy, right?
Yeah, my my first year on the Bills radio network was Van's last calling games. So it was only a year where I was kind of crossing paths with him on a weekly basis, but yeah, it was pretty cool because he would give you time. I know I don't have to tell you this, but he would give you more than the customary 2 or 3 minutes or a hello in passing. If you were in the industry and you had a question, he'd give you an answer. And this was kind of unsolicited, but I was doing UB football games at the time and UB women's basketball, and Van went to a lot of those UB football games that were at home on Saturdays. And the crazy thing is, he was in a box that was right next to the radio booth. So it's like one of my first UB games. I look over my left and Van's over there. He's in the booth, which is, maybe intimidating enough. But then on top of that, he's got a little earpiece in his ear with his transistor radio. And I'm like, holy crap, Van's listening to me. So that was a little intimidating. But the crazy thing about that was, like, we'd both be at the stadium the next day for a home Bills game. And one time he just came up to me and was like, "Hey, buddy, I heard you on the UB game. You did a great job. That team's terrible, but you made the game sound exciting." And he's going on and on and on. And I'm thinking, like, this was the first time he did it. I was like, oh, he's just being nice and blowing smoke up my rear. But the next game, the next week, he'd come back, he'd talk to me, like, just walk by, and because I'm sitting in the press box, third row, I'm covering the team for GR, and he just walks over and he's just rapping with me for like 5 minutes a week. And he's like, "I like that call you had on this or whatever." And I was like, "Oh, well, maybe I'm doing something right here." So I kind of took a lot of those conversations to heart and just tried to stash a couple of lessons away here and there, and just in an effort to make yourself better and kind of hone your craft.
Sure. I always wondered, because I've done it a handful of times doing like high school and college, just locally. And I never asked anybody, and I wish I had at some point. And I was very close with Murph, and obviously I've been close with you for a long time. And I worked with Van for a couple of years, and I never really asked him if they sort of prepared ahead of time. In other words, for catchphrases and nicknames and things like that. So like, Keon Coleman scores a touchdown and, "Oh, Coleman is cooler," something silly like that. And,
Yeah.
if guys actually, plan ahead and think of those things ahead of time in case situationally, there comes that time when they could maybe drop those in and it sounds cool and different, unique, whatever. But I don't know. I mean, have you ever thought that or thought of that? Or are you more of a sort of ad lib kind of go as it goes kind of guy?
Yeah, I would say I'm more of a go as it goes kind of guy. That's not to say that a thought hasn't ever popped into my head when I'm thinking about an upcoming game, but I would say more, and I think a lot of broadcasters are this way. If they sense some big moments coming here, like, if it's a playoff series and it's a game 7 and it's coming down to the wire, and this guy's been on fire for the last half a quarter, if he hits this shot at the end, I got to come up with something good for that. So while you're broadcasting the game, maybe in a commercial break, you might be thinking of something based on how the game's unfolding, but 2 or 3 days in advance, I think, is a little tough to pull off. Um, I'm not a huge nickname guy, but I mean, it just came to me when James Cook scored a touchdown last year that I just said the cook is in the kitchen. And I don't say that for every one of his touchdowns, but a lot of times I will, and people seem to like it. So I'm just sticking with it for now. If James tells me he hates it, I'll scrap it. But yeah, and like the Nyheim Hines touchdown, he was just running so fast and nobody could catch him against the Patriots after the DeMar incident. It just popped into my head like, nobody can catch this guy. He's like the gingerbread man. But I didn't want to say he's the gingerbread man, so I said, run as fast as you can. You're not catching Hines. He's your end zone man. And like, I just kind of ad-libbed it, but I don't know why, but I'm calling the play and I was like, he's running away from everybody. They can't catch him. And then I don't know why gingerbread man popped into my head like a childhood nursery rhyme, but I just took it and just ran with it in a different direction. So it's more ad lib that it
Yeah,
just pops into my head.
for sure, for sure. I want to go back to Van really quick. As you know, he did NBA. I mean, he did the Braves,
Yeah.
right? I mean, did you ever have a chance to sit down and talk to him about that, being as big of a Knicks and NBA fan as you were growing up?
Yeah, I didn't talk to him specifically about basketball broadcasting, but I did ask him about the Braves and what that time was like here. It's funny because there were some loose connections. I think one of the reasons I brought it up to him was because my high school soccer coach on Long Island went to Buffalo State and played soccer there in the 60s when they were going to Final Fours. And not only did he play on the basketball team at Buff State, but Randy Smith played on the soccer team. So my high school soccer coach was his teammate on the Buff State
Wow.
soccer team. And so I remember talking to Van about that and saying, hey, did you know that Randy Smith was also on the Buff State soccer team? Um, so I think that's kind of how the conversation started, if I remember it right. And he was just telling me how great the games were and how Braves fans hated the Celtics with a burning passion and all of that stuff. So it's just a shame that we don't still have that here. Um, and I know the history is a little ugly, but in terms of why the team left and how the team left and all of that jazz. But yeah, it'd be cool if we still had that. But yeah, I mean, it's the fact that he was able to do that and do NFL games is pretty wild.
Yeah. So back to you and the first game you did, obviously most people know by now, was the DeMar game. And in terms of being the Bills play-by-play guy, tell me what the minutes before that game were like, because you kind of, I mean, you found out not long before the game was going to happen that you were
Right.
going to step in and be that guy. So what was going through your head knowing that that was about to happen? And I'm not
Getting
talking about
ready.
tomorrow in particular. I'm just talking
No,
about,
no, no. Yeah, I know what you're saying. It was get ready fast.
yeah,
Um, like I would do loose prep every week because I had been Murph's backup for probably the better part of 12 years. And so every week you try to just do some base preparation. So if, there's a left turn at the end of the week, you're not going in completely blind or unprepared. So I got on the plane. It was a Monday night game. So we got on the plane Sunday to fly to Cincinnati. And my boss, Jeff Matthews, says, you may have to start getting ready. Murph's not making the flight. And so I said, is everything okay? And he didn't have a lot of details to give to me. And we were told something different than what his actual affliction was. And maybe that's because the family wanted to keep it private. And I totally get that, especially, right after the moment it happened or days after it happened. So I was like, all right, I'll get ready. But I'm thinking it's Sunday. The game's Monday night. Like, even if Murph feels better the next day, he could drive to Cincinnati and
right.
still do the game. So we got to Cincinnati and I was with one of my department execs and he said, nothing's finalized, but by 9 a.m. tomorrow, you'll know definitively whether or not you're doing the game. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to get ready. So that night, I went to dinner and I came right back to the hotel and I watched the Bengals' last two games and just kind of called their players off the videos, off my laptop, just to kind of familiarize myself with the players and everything. And then the next morning, they told me at 9 a.m. you're doing the game. So I went down to like a local Walgreens, grabbed like 4-color Sharpie pack, 2 manila folders, and just started drawing up my boards in my hotel room that morning for the Bills and for the Bengals. And then I had to meet with our radio engineers, Greg Harvey and Todd Brody, and we had to kind of literally run through the pregame script, that half hour leading up to kickoff that I know you're familiar with. So we had to go through all the particulars of that during lunch. I mean, thank God it was a Monday night game because we had a lot of extra time to lead up to that, and that kind of gave me some valuable time to properly prepare.
On probably not much sleep.
No, I think I slept okay. I don't sleep well in hotels as a rule. So yeah, I was probably up early, but the Walgreens didn't open until 9. So, and that was the closest thing on foot. So, I mean, I wasn't going to find out for sure until 9 anyway. So I just kind of watched some more stuff on my laptop while I was waiting for the store to open to go get the materials I needed.
By the way, people don't know generally how tough your job is, aside from the obvious calling the games themselves. It has become sort of, I think, regular for you recently in the last few years, anyway, where your vantage points in stadiums are horrific, right? I mean, I saw a picture that you took from the Ravens from M&T Bank Stadium, and you guys were in the corner end zone, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, with NFL teams trying to generate as much revenue as they can from their stadiums, they're moving a lot of broadcast areas to less desirable locations to build luxury seating, suites, and those kinds of things, which, I get that. Um, I would say, unfortunately, we're getting more and more of these stadiums, moving us off into corners, and that just makes the job a little bit harder. I was pretty surprised when we went to SoFi Stadium last year, and we're not even really in the corner. We're kind of facing the field lengthwise almost. So we're not even kind of on the corner on the side. We're towards the short end of the end zone, or the short end line. We're behind the end line. And so you're basically looking at the game as if you had an end zone seat the whole time, which people might not think is a big deal. And you can watch plays develop when they're coming out of your end. That's
Mm-hmm.
great. The other half of the field is a challenge because to see what the player got on the play gain wise is almost impossible. And so I learned very quickly, your best friend in those kinds of locations is the head linesman, because wherever he's standing after the play is what I got to know so I can tell people what the gain was on the play, because I have no way of getting that by where I'm sitting by just watching the ball carrier.
And the other thing too, just in that one particular vantage point, you're behind whatever offense is there, and so even tougher for you to figure out who's making the tackle defensively, right? Because you can't really see their side of the ball.
Yeah, usually you're up, well, at SoFi anyway, you're up high enough where you can kind of see over the row of players that are in front of you to see behind them. But if it's further down the field, yes, it's
Yeah.
tougher. If you go back to the week 2 game against the Dolphins, which is easily the worst booth in the league, and all of my fellow broadcasters in the league will attest to that. The window's finally open now, so that's good. The problem is they four-paned the windows. So there's a bar here, a bar
Oh
in the middle, and
no.
a bar here. So you're trying to look at the whole field and you're kind of bobbing and weaving around a bar the whole game. So if you listen back to the Dolphins game and Cook's first touchdown, that is on the extreme near corner, far side, and I'm in the corner here. So I'm sticking my head out to try to see, because he's right by the pylon. I got to see if he's getting 2 feet in, and I wasn't 100% sure. So on the call, I actually say, is he in? And I'm waiting on the linesman to give me the touchdown sign so I can definitively say, yes, he is, touchdown, Buffalo, and so you run into some of those things. And so the best friend is a linesman with a quick signal. They are a lifesaver.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's move on and let's talk the Raven game. Clearly the Bills won't face the kind of running back tandem that they did in that game, with the loads that Ricard and Henry were. But let me ask you a couple of questions about the game. Number one, where do you think the Bills were most exposed in that game? Did you think it was offensively in the sort of intermediate to deeper pass game, and even a little bit in the run game? Or on the other side, do you think it was the run defense and potentially, maybe the lack of size on it?
Yeah, I just think it was a bad night overall. They lost at the line of scrimmage. I think we knew going in, I was talking to Eric Wood about this in the pregame. that this was going to be arguably their most physical game of the season. There might be others down the stretch here. The Jets defense is very physical too, coming up in a couple of weeks here. But we thought it was going to be a physical game, primetime atmosphere. Ravens are going to be juiced. You got to be ready for that. And I just did not feel that they were ready for that. Now, that's not to say the Bills can't play physical, because in the previous 3 games, I thought they were whipping people at the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball, but they just did not have the same juice that the Ravens did. And that's kind of the way this league is. Like, if you don't bring your best to every game you play, you could very easily get embarrassed, even by a middle of the road team. I think we all see the Ravens as an upper echelon team. So you don't bring your best against them, they're going to embarrass you. So I don't really feel like it was a size thing or a scheme thing necessarily. I mean, I think the coaches for the Ravens did do a great job, had a great game plan, and their players just flat out executed better than Buffalo's did. But I thought there was an energy and an urgency. I mean, even Josh referred to it after the game. He said they had a greater urgency than us in the game, and I think that translated into more physical play throughout.
Yeah, I have been mentioning over the last couple of weeks that I felt like the Bills offense to that point going into the Raven game almost was relaxed, comfortable, stress-free. And in that game, I felt like it was a 180. I felt Josh he just had a worried look on his face most of the game. There wasn't that confidence that you felt in the first 3 weeks of the season. And to your point about the urgency, I mean, just the energy level of the Bills can play compared to the Ravens. I mean, it wasn't even close. And you wonder, I know it's a long season, and I know people say, well, no one's going to run the table, but I personally, me as a fan, I don't like the excuse of, well, it's a game and we're going to move on. I don't like that sort of nonchalantness, which is what I sort of felt like I heard after that game. I wanted more. I'm pissed. We got our ass kicked. That's kind of what I wanted more of, and I didn't feel like I saw that or heard that.
Yeah, I don't know where to kind of come down on that. I think these lopsided losses have been so few and far between in the McDermott era that they don't rattle me watching this team. I understand you're always going to have your segment of fans for every team that, panic, knee-jerk reaction, want to replace everybody on the roster and start over. But I think if you've followed the history in the McDermott era, you know that these lopsided losses don't come around often. On top of that, the coaching staff course corrects maybe better than any staff I've seen here in Buffalo in terms of getting their team back on track. And look, I don't know this for a fact, but when you win 2 games by 20 and 37 points, as much as you try to stick to the task at hand and prepare, maybe you get a little complacent and feel like, man, we're world beaters. So in a strange way, that might be a good thing that they got smacked around, just as a reminder, like, you got to bring it every week in this league because the competition level is just too stiff.
Yeah. And I think testament to that game too was the fact that the only big play was on a broken play. And I mean, that just cannot be your MO, right? I mean,
yeah.
And if I'm a defense, I mean, we've seen that play. We've seen Josh make that play how many times in his career? A gazillion. And if I'm a defense, I'm making him. And don't get me wrong, he can throw it pretty much from anywhere on the field and do well with it. But if I'm a defense, I'm not letting him go right ever, because he seemingly makes that throw. We've seen him make that throw about to go out of bounds 100 times, almost always successful. So if I'm a defense, I'm looking to force him left. What did you make of the trick play real quick? Because looking at that play, thought, and I know everybody sort of had their own breakdown of what happened. So I'm watching that play, and in my brain, I'm thinking, okay, here's what's going to happen. Ideally, Samuel gets the ball the way you saw it come about. He pitches to Josh. I'm thinking Josh basically ends up back towards the pocket-ish area, And the idea is to get Samuel to break out now on the outside. Maybe Van Noy is pursuing Josh. Now Samuel's on the outside. If you watch the old 22, the two receivers are deep. So that's basically a clear out for Samuel to have 50 yards down the sideline. That's kind of what I think might have supposed to have happened. I'm not sure. But, again, you said it. That play, if executed, would have been a whole lot different. But Van Noy blew the whole thing up because somebody missed a block.
Yeah, I would say the timing of calling that play probably wasn't great because you had seized the momentum back in the game. You had sent the Ravens offense out 3 and out twice. You put a touchdown on the board and you're driving again. And you're at midfield already. And I understand maybe wanting to take a shot play there. I think the most unfortunate thing about calling that trick play is just by having Curtis Samuel in the shotgun and Josh out wide to the left, it's already an alert like something's coming here.
Right.
So I just feel like if you were going to call a trick play there, call one that's more disguised within the normal framework of your formation. Don't give that to him before you even snap the football. Because Van Noy said after the game, as soon as I saw Josh lined up out wide and Samuel in the shotgun, I was pissed. He's like, you're going to play this game with us when we're manhandling you? He's like, so right from there, I wanted to blow the whole thing up. So I think from the word go, it was kind of doomed because it was tipping their hand before they even snapped the ball.
Van Noy is one of those really underrated guys who's always played really well against the Bills, no matter whatever team he's been on. All right, let's move on. And I'm sure you you can't because you do your daily radio and TV show. So it's hard for you to have the 24-hour rule, like the team and the coaches and the players. But obviously you're now moved on. So now it's the Texans. And before we get to that, what do you make of and how much will it hurt the Bills in terms of Von Miller's suspension going now into the Texans and the Jets and some of that heart of the difficult schedule that the Bills have in front of them?
Yeah, the timing's never good on a suspension, but in this stretch of games, knowing he's going to miss these two Texans Jets is kind of tough to take. You could almost see Coach McDermott this week, in the press conference on Wednesday, basically saying, you could almost sense he was a little frustrated by it, but you really don't have any choice. I mean, I suppose Von could appeal if he wanted to, but we haven't heard anything about that even taking place. So it looks like he's just going to sit and take it. The one thing that I am excited about is seeing more of Javon Solomon because I thought he flashed in training camp. The kid is put together. He's got muscles on top of muscles. And then even though he's only like 6 foot, maybe 6'1", which is short for an end, he has 34-inch arms, which are long for somebody that size, and 11-inch hands, which are completely unusual for somebody that size. And I talked to Greg Rousseau about him in training camp, and Greg basically, I asked him, I said, well, who's impressed you the most here in training camp, in the D-line room? And he said, Javon Solomon. I didn't ask him for a young player. I said, any player. And he just said, Javon Solomon. I said, why? He said, because his hands are so strong and he could just manipulate offensive tackles. And, he got a little playing time in the Jacksonville game and forced a fumble and, strip sack. So I'm not saying he's going to light the world on fire, but I'm curious to see if he's got something to give them to kind of help fill the void. I don't know if he's going to completely fill what Von does, but if he can make a splash play or two here over the next couple of weeks, I think it can go a long way to helping them.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting because I think I could be wrong here, but I think the 25-point loss to Baltimore took the Diggs part of this game down a notch. Would you agree?
I think the jury's still out on that. I think it's probably the loss has the media focused elsewhere. I would agree with that. But I think by the time we get to the end of the week, it's going to be all that CBS is talking about. If anything gets said for the rest of the week on both sides, it'll get flared up in the drop of a hat. So I'll believe it when I see it, that it's not a storyline.
2 out of 4 games this year, Ed Oliver has had 0 in the tackle department. That's got to quickly come to an end, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, it's pretty clear that they are game planning for Ed, and proof of that is what the Ravens did on the very first play with the trap block on him. They are concerned with his penetrating ability and, devise schemes to thwart that. Now, he's going to have to come up with counter plans there. And that was part of what took his game to the next level last year when he had a 9.5 sack season. It finally clicked for him on the mental side of the game because he had largely gotten by just on natural athletic ability for his entire college career and the first few years of his NFL career, which had some mixed success, I think would be fair to say. So the fact that he raised his football IQ in terms of coming up with counter moves and contingency plans elevated his game. He's got to get back to that. Otherwise, he's going to get taken out of game plans way too easily.
Yeah, for sure. Who do you think's got the more pressure on them this week? You think it's the Texans because, with the win at home against the Bills, they now, they more cement themselves into that elite AFC discussion, or is it on the Bills to rebound from, their worst loss in terms of deficit in years?
Yeah, that's a good one. I don't know. Because obviously you could make the case that the Texans can use this as a measuring stick game for them to vault them into the upper echelon conversation, even though they were everybody's media darling going into the season with, the big offseason signings that they had, the trade acquisition of Diggs. So, I know, by the way, they have a great young quarterback, but I'm very curious to see how the Texans handle a first place schedule. They gotta play Baltimore later this year. They have to play Kansas City later this year. So let's see how they do when they have to play first place teams and not last place teams like they did last year when they won the division. And then for the Bills, I don't think they look at it like that. I think they just want to get back on track. I think we're going to get a lot of the we just want to go 1-0 this week mantra kind of thing. I think the Bills have been in too many big games. Even this young core now that exists, they've been in enough big games to just kind of take this for what it is. Let's get a win and move on.
A lot of talk this week has been about, Devontae Adams and, the Bills don't have that number one and what's going on with the receiver core and no one can separate and yada, yada, yada. And Shakir's the only one that can make plays. And where's Curtis Samuel? And okay, we're a quarter of the season in. What do you make of the wide receiver core? And even Dalton Kincaid, who, let's face it, I mean, the guy's got, he's become more of a possession receiver than a deep threat at all. And I think more people thought he'd be more of a deep threat than he's been.
Yeah, I just feel like the whole offense is still feeling out the passing game, and with no true number one, there isn't a well-defined pecking order. And I think Joe Brady likes it that way. But I think if we get to week 6 or week 7 or even week 8 and the roles aren't getting defined, he may have to do a little more of that as OC going forward. But I just believe in the player development abilities of this coaching staff. And so Steve and I on our show talked all offseason about, with all the newness that the roster has, there may be a game or two in the first half of the season where they stub their toe a little bit, don't score as much as they should, just because of the lack of familiarity in where each guy fits and the role they need to play in a given game plan. But I think by November, December, this team has a chance to be better than the team they had last year if it all comes together the way it should. I mean, there's a ton of talent on the team. It's just kind of weaving all the pieces together and getting it to sing. I think the high flying and scoring early in the season maybe led everybody down the path of, oh my God, we're awesome right now. And I think it was a little bit of fool's gold. I think there are going to be growing pains here and there. And that's why I think Joe Brady's going to probably continue to lean on the run game a little bit while the pecking order of the passing game kind of sorts itself out, week to week.
I'm so happy you said that, because I felt like James Cook was not used enough in that game against Baltimore.
Yeah, not last week. No.
Yeah, and he's such a weapon in both the pass and run game, obviously, and it's really developed in one of the best backs in all of the league. Well, it should be fun. I'm assuming you're looking forward to getting some either Tex-Mex or barbecue in Houston.
Well, yes, I am a Mexican food junkie, so that is happening. Yeah. I mean, I've done the Brazilian steakhouses and all of that stuff before. Been there, done that. I don't need to be a glutton anymore. I just want a nice Mexican dinner
or the red card.
Nice
Stop
Mexican
or stop.
Yeah, nice Mexican dinner with a nice Mexican beer, and we'll be good.
Fantastic, man. Well, enjoy the call. We'll be listening. Obviously, we will be continuing to listen and watch on GR and obviously on MSG on your show with Tasker. It was great to finally get you in the basement, my friend, and we really appreciate it, man. Good seeing you.
Yeah, good to see you. No problem. Anytime.
All right.